Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon. Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/Chronicle. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. If you missed Security Weekly Unlocked, that was our virtual conference last December, you can access all of the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock. Click the link to register or the link to log in, and you can enjoy all the content. For this segment, we are joined by Sounil Yu from YL Ventures to discuss the Cyber Defense Matrix. Sounil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Yes. So, Sounil, tell us a little bit about your background, how you got here, and what you do today.
Sure. Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm the CISO in residence at YL Ventures, and the in residence piece doesn't mean I just work from home, although that's
what most of us do, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's an opportunity for me to work with various entrepreneurs to help them understand the problem space around security from an enterprise standpoint, from a CISO standpoint, and encourage them to really tackle the problems that I feel like are unaddressed in the market. And yeah, basically just work with them to come up with a product and subsequently help them with go-to-market and various other things that a startup needs to do. Before that, I was the chief security scientist at Bank of America, where I had the opportunity to really run a really cool team that was trying to drive the next generation of where security needed to be. And so this included building capabilities of our own, also looking at the vendor landscape and understanding what's out there in the market, running various functions like a purple team and so on and so forth. But that problem around finding vendors in the market, anybody who's, well, yeah, I'm sure everyone is quite familiar with this problem, but there's a lot of vendors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And trying to understand what they do and how they fit into your portfolio of capabilities is a non-trivial activity. And with that challenge in hand, I had to come up with something that was more structured and systematic. And so that's why I came up with something called the Cyber Defense Matrix. And it's just a simple, structured way to think about the space, and then subsequently find solutions and iterate through in a very methodical way to find gaps and opportunities and so on and so forth.
I gotcha. So it sounds like it could work both ways. It could help you find the right solutions, but also as an entrepreneur, help you find where some of the gaps might be
That's exactly
to come up with new products.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I've been doing at YL Ventures as well. It's how do you know something is missing unless you have some sort of structure that makes it very clear that something is missing. And so that's essentially what I've been doing with some of the entrepreneurs there, and basically showing them here's a space that describes the problem space or the problems that we have in security. Let's look at a particular area that seems underserved and see what sort of problems emerge from there. What's also interesting is that because of the structure of the matrix, it also gives us hints as to how we might want to tackle that problem as well. Because we'll see successful implementations of how someone tackled a particular problem in one domain, and it turns out we could apply similar practices or similar techniques for another domain. I was listening to Jonathan earlier, and as he was going through what Intrigue does, for me, I have a hammer here, and I see a bunch of nails, right? And so in the context of even how Jonathan was describing what Intrigue does, I was like, okay, I see you covering this and this, but I see a gap here. I don't see you covering this. But given that you've done it for this and this, I think there's a pattern that can be applied to the one piece that you're missing. Anyway, so it's an interesting mechanism, a construct to help really think through what makes a solution thorough and complete. And it's been a really useful
Yeah,
tool.
and that's just but that's just
clearly
one
we should have
interesting thing.
overlapped the segments, Paul.
Right, exactly. But that's just one interesting thing that we see is the two ends of the spectrum. There are some startups that I see, and I think most of us on this call, right, advise companies, and they're just like really specific. Now they're doing a really good job, but like they're really narrow and specific, and you got to help them. Like, okay, like where would you go from here, right? And then there's other ones that you're like, well, you're just trying to take on like everything in cybersecurity, and you should probably consolidate down, right? And I think there's certainly some happy mediums that vary per category, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself is an interesting exercise with most, let alone not just startups, but really any cybersecurity company, right?
Yeah. Finding adjacencies is actually really easy now with the structure because the structure just naturally reveals them. But even though that there's an adjacency, how you tackle it or what that adjacency really looks like does require some degree of domain knowledge and understanding some secret knowledge that helps you understand how to tackle the problem. Again, I can share with you what it looks like at the macro level, but when you dive in a little deeper, it still requires some degree of ingenuity and understanding of the problem space. But it at least directionally helps you go towards areas that again are underserved.
Right. From the customer side, Sounil, how do you look at what inevitably is happening in consolidation and tackle the question that we've been trying to answer and talk with people about, and that is, do I get a bunch of point solutions and integrate them together to solve problems, or do I go to a larger vendor that has solutions in all these areas? And albeit the feedback that most of us give, myself included, is there's usually a few that aren't great, but I can get them from all one place. There's some cost savings there, and there's some other integration pieces that are more tightly integrated. How do you tackle that problem? Point solution versus one larger solution from one provider.
Yeah, and it's certainly a problem that we see, especially if legacy solutions that don't have APIs, for example. I think this problem has become easier when we started seeing more products shift towards an API-centric approach where everything is really exposed to an API. But this consolidation piece that you're talking about, again, I have a hammer. Apologies for seeing problems as a nail. But I've actually mapped out the acquisition strategy. Well, what appears to be a strategy. I'm not sure if there's a strategy actually for some of these companies, some of these larger organizations. But I've taken various acquisitions that we see big companies doing and put them into the matrix to say, okay, I see this company has acquired, let's say, an endpoint solution. What I would then subsequently expect to see is them filling out the various problem spaces associated with endpoints. And some companies have done that and then work towards integrating those into some cohesive platform, which is great, right? That's exactly what we as practitioners need. I've seen other companies, and I'm not going to name names because it'll be embarrassing for them, where they are literally like all over the map, and it's not really even clear what their strategy is. They literally are just acquiring these different point products, but there are no obvious adjacencies, at least not to me. Maybe I'm missing something. And I should mention, the cyber defense matrix is been extremely useful, but in me studying it for a while, I have seen a lot of flaws and what it can do and what it can and can't do. And I still welcome feedback and criticism on it because I do want to see whether or not it can fully explain our space. And where it fails to explain it, it gives me a challenge to think about, well, how can it be adapted to address these problems or understanding of the space better? So again, I look at the acquisition strategy of a particular company that we all know, and it's all over the map. And maybe my validation that it is literally all over the map and there's not a cohesive strategy is perhaps manifested in things like their stock price, or at least how they message some of these products to the market. There is no clear messaging. There's no clear storyline. Whereas others, they'll say, in fact, you can even read on the acquisition strategies. Some of them will say, we bought something here and something here, and this fills in a gap here. Right? It's like, of course. I mean, but it's so obvious to me. It's to the point where I can predict that based on the structure of the matrix. And so it's been actually very validating that the matrix helps us find those opportunities for consolidation. Particularly, again, if you're a larger company trying to fill out your portfolio of capabilities. by putting them on the map, so to speak, you can see whether or not you actually have a strategy.
Can show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Tyler?
Yeah, so Sounil, given that you're a EIR at YL, you see tons of pitches, I'm sure, and you're using this matrix to try to understand how they fit into the greater picture in the world. You're doing analysis on M&A and corp dev moves at the larger scale. You must have formed one or more investment theses, right? What do you think the future of, I guess, security investment, security technologies? Where are there gaps where things might be underfunded? Where are the gaps where there's opportunity for net new development of innovative products? Have you done any of that level of kind of abstracting it up to a point where it might be a good investment thesis?
Yeah. So the answer to your question is yes. This is almost what we do constantly or daily as a part of working for a VC, trying to think through what is that next area that we need to address. So I do it. We do it in a couple different ways. As I mentioned earlier, we can see gaps. It's pretty obvious from the cyber defense matrix that there's a gap in particular areas. And then the investment thesis here is that we'll have buyers. It may not be explicitly understood at the time, or we need to figure out how to couch the problem in a way that people can easily resonate with it. But we know that there's a gap here because there's just no products that serve that particular space. Actually, I didn't mean to do this as a plug, but this is a company that we really recently invested in that was based off this approach. So we're actually putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, and saying, yes, we think there's a gap there, and we'll try to tackle it.
And unless I'm wrong, and there's nothing wrong with mentioning that company, that's totally fine. We're good with that here. But unless I'm wrong, that company is in a similar space to what Jonathan Cram was talking about. Is in a similar space to what I do, right? A similar market.
No, so it's not doing attack surface management, or now it does do asset. Well, just about every product out there has some form of let me inventory or discover your assets. Okay, so that's a given, right? Almost you can't. It's like table stakes for a lot of things. The angle that we took here was one. There definitely is a need for inventorying applications. We oftentimes, for example, so CIS control number 2 says inventory your software. But oftentimes when we talk about software, we're really just talking about installed software, shrink wrap software. We're not talking about applications that you build and operate and run. We have many organizations have an application inventory, but that application inventory is oftentimes woefully incomplete. It's manually updated, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that application inventory becomes opaque because people put in they bundle applications into one particular identification code and are doing this to basically avoid compliance requirements for every application that they own. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of other issues that emerge from it. But more importantly, once you have an application identified, you want to make sure that it goes through your security development process, your security development lifecycle. And making sure that happens and tracking that is one area that we have a gap. One starting point is make sure that you know what your applications are and the ones that you build, that not the ones you buy, but the ones that you build. Make sure that you have a complete inventory of that. Make sure you know who the owners are. And then subsequently, based on the risk, based on a risk score or risk posture that you have, make sure that they go through the necessary steps to that are defined in whatever SDLC that you might have.
So the cyber defense matrix that you've created, that you're leveraging here, helped you guys make the decision to invest in Enzo. So that's super cool. Why aren't more VCs doing that level of analysis when it comes to security investments? Because clearly it's a differentiator when you're talking about where to put your money, right? It's a very clear expectation of due diligence and understanding market dynamics. But I'm curious, is it just a lack of understanding of the market, or because quite frankly, I love what you put together. The cyber defense matrix is a really great way of analyzing how things work at the higher level of the market. So is it open source? Is it publicly available? How can people leverage it?
Yeah, I've tried to make it as open as possible. You can visit the website cyberdefensematrix.com, and find at least my splash page that will point you to other content. Most of the content right now is on the OWASP page, where I link to a bunch of media that's available there. As far as other VCs putting it to use, the only one that I know explicitly that's also putting it to use is ForgePoint. And that's maybe partly because of the strength of relationship that I have with them. But they haven't paid me for it. That's okay. That's okay. I made it open source for a reason, because I really do want people to put it to use, to criticize it, to see where it breaks and see where it works, and to be able to share that collectively as a community so that we can really mature our own understanding and practices around cybersecurity. But anyway, you also mentioned, I didn't answer a question that you also had, which was like, where are we going? What are the what's the investment thesis that I have for the future as well? So there's clearly stuff that's happening with there's a lot of things that we're doing in the cloud native type of environments that we're really trying to migrate into. There's a huge adoption of SaaS. So those are pretty obvious directions that we're heading, where we definitely need additional investment and additional insights and technologies. But at a macro level, I've actually defined another way to think about where the future of security needs to go. And it's what I call the DIE Triad. And DIE stands for distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. And the perspective of the DIE Triad is the more that we move towards those three principles of distributed, immutable, and ephemeral, the less it burdens us, the less burden that we have to be able to have to practice CIA. So the more ephemeral something is, the less. Well, anyway, each of the principles of DIE provide a counter to the principles of CIA. I mean, and so one of the things I'm trying to look for are companies that help promote the creation of systems and assets and that align more and more towards DIE.
Is that your pets and cattle analogy that you were? I was just digging through.
Yes.
Because another good friend of mine used that analogy, and I love it. I think it's really a great way to explain the ephemeral versus static kind of assets, right?
Yep. Yeah. You CIA your pets and you DIE your cattle.
Which gets into all kinds of interesting conversations about pets and cattle and slaughter and things like that. It can get kind of a little weird, but
there's a visceral reaction to it because, well, for one, pets are things you definitely care about. You don't want to lose a pet, but you also don't want to have 50 of them, right?
Yeah,
in your house.
That's a good point. Yep.
Yeah, and so it provides a very visual reminder that we should perhaps be exercising more pet control for the future as well.
Sounil, where do you see some of the greatest opportunities for entrepreneurs today? You have people sitting around and they're like, I want to do something, and I'm in search of like the next thing. Like where are some of the gaps that you think people can focus on and have good success?
Well, we kind of hit upon it earlier with respect to the consolidation, and my journey through the VC ecosystem. We have perceptions of certain things coming in, and towards the tail end now, I have some realizations. So one is the things that really need to happen sometimes are not a investable company, and that's hard, right? How do you deal with that? And that's a struggle that I'm trying to wrestle through. I'll give you an example at a meta level. So I think one of the things that the industry really needs is more integration. Okay, and that goes back to the consolidation piece. We consolidate these different tools, and we whether we consolidate them because we bought them, or a larger company consolidates them because they've acquired them. Either way, there's a huge integration effort that we have to do. But that's a hard problem, one, and but it's one that we really, really need to solve and make easier. But it's hard to make that scalable across. Right now, it's hard to scale that across many different enterprises and whatnot. But that's going to be the one hard problem that we still will face, and we need better solutions to address. And anyway, and I mentioned earlier, there's plenty of opportunity in the cloud security space, just because that's where a lot of movement's heading. Another area that there's some green energy company that a lot of people are struggling with too, but it points to the bigger issue of how do you do third-party risk management or the risk assessment better. And honestly, there's a lot of tools out there that don't really move the needle on that front. And I have some ideas in terms of how we can truly that move the needle to demonstratively show that we've improved our vendor security in some way. So anyway, that's another area I think that is ripe for.
Well, yeah, and that's such a hot topic today when you look at how everyone trusted SolarWinds, right? Which is the elephant in the room right now. But a lot of us that were, covering that story when it first broke were like, yeah, but all right, let's not pick on SolarWinds, number one, because number two, right on the heels of that is think about all the vendors that you have to trust. And to your point, Sounil, you've done some due diligence to say, I trust these third-party vendors to a certain extent because I've done some type of assessment, but that doesn't mean they can't be the next SolarWinds, right?
Yeah. I think you said something that really, I think, points to the issue that we're dealing with. Vendors that we trust. Mm-hmm. And therein, we're violating a core principle that we've embraced elsewhere, the principle of zero trust, right? So why is it that we are applying zero trust to our own assets, but not to somebody else's that we're getting from, some vendor that we don't really have much control over? So the question is, how do we apply the concept of zero trust to our third parties? Going back to the cyber defense matrix, I actually think that it provides a really strong hint and clue, which is how is it that we apply zero trust to our applications or to our endpoints or to our network, okay? And can we apply similar principles then to our vendors? I know I can't trust my network. In fact, I know I should assume that it's compromised. I know I can't trust my vendor. In fact, I should assume that my vendor is compromised. Mm-hmm. I should assume all my vendors are compromised. Okay. Now, where do we go from here? And that sort of parallel is something that the cyber defense matrix, again, helps me do over and over again. And it makes it really easy to, define the problem, and then two, get hints on how to tackle the problem. There's still a lot of hard work to be done to actually go and figure out the details. But at the 30,000-foot view, it's pretty apparent.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting because I think the answer for a lot of us is, I have to trust that vendor because they have to do X, Y, and Z. In order to be able to do X, Y, and Z, like SolarWinds, I have to trust them. And I think that for some means I'm just not going to do a bunch of due diligence because it doesn't matter. I have to trust them regardless. And that's kind of scary.
And this is where principles of DIE fit in too. Mm. So what's been interesting in thinking through this with every one of these scenarios is, I want to take something like a particular vendor product. And the question I have for myself is, how do I make it one step more distributed, immutable, and or ephemeral? Okay. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, I won't be able to do that. But in other cases, you put your thinking hat on and you'll come up with creative ways to make something more DIE. It won't be fully DIE, but you can take one step closer. I'll give you a very specific example with SolarWinds. So if you look at the CISA directive that came out around SolarWinds, it says if you're going to put this back in and turn it on, then you got to do these things. And one of them was make sure that you follow look at the guidelines that SolarWinds puts out saying, here are the ports that it can talk to. Here are the IP addresses that it can talk to. Here are the domains that it should talk to. All right. Make that immutable. All right. Mm-hmm. Easy to say, hard to do.
Right.
But SolarWinds provides a PDF. Okay. It's hard to consume, but it says, here's what it does. And we take that immutable statement or that posture, that perspective of here's what this box should be doing. And you make that immutable so that if someone breaks into the SolarWinds box and does something funny, guess what? It can only talk to those things that it was meant to talk to. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't. It really narrows the channel of opportunity for the attackers. They can't just go talk to AVMS cloud and blah blah blah. They have to go back through the update server, as an example. So anyway, bottom line is that the opportunity to apply zero trust principles, the opportunity to apply DIE as a principle, it takes imagination and it takes effort, but it's steps that we can definitely take to move us closer and closer to the state of having actually a more secure environment.
Adrian, are you smiling because SolarWinds did announce some other vulnerabilities that we haven't covered yet on this show that we'll cover tomorrow on Pulse Security Weekly? But I don't want to leave that out, as it's probably the chat room is probably chatting about that. Well, SolarWinds just had some vulnerabilities they announced, as does every software company. So there's that.
Yep. All right. You patch them all today. Guess what? Tomorrow you'll have another one. So,
Tyler, did you have some closing questions for Sounil?
No, I was just going to comment how I feel like, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, Sounil, the DIE paradigm that you're describing almost directly parallels the transition from traditional infrastructure design, application design, et cetera, into a more modern cloud approach, right? The similar immutable constructs within, say, workloads that are ephemeral and distributed, and you're really taking security and giving it the treatment that the infrastructure has had so that we can get those to line up and match over time.
Yeah, and it's actually applying it to, again, it's apologies for the hammer again, but I apply it towards devices or hosts. I apply it to applications, containers, serverless functions, whatever. I apply it to networks, so it's SDNs and whatnot. I apply it to data. And data is a little harder. Like, how do you make data DIE like? And then for those who know my cyber defense matrix, there's 5 asset classes. So devices, applications, networks, data, and users. It makes it a little bit more uncomfortable when we talk about users and making them DIE. But if you think about it, there are some examples of that as well, whether it's outsourcing or Mechanical Turk or various other things. But let me go back to data for a moment. I think it is definitely taking cloud native principles and what we're doing in the cloud. But what's interesting about the data side is it occurred to me that a lot of what we're doing for privacy is actually well aligned with the DIE principles. What we're trying to do with our personal data through various privacy enhancing technologies, which, by the way, has the acronym PET, is actually making data itself more DIE-like. Yeah. And I think that's actually pretty cool, which means we should be promoting the founding of new companies, security companies, or just companies in general that are trying to help move the needle to make our data more and more DIE-like and still work with all the applications that we deal with today.
Agreed. Yeah, if you don't need to collect it and store it, then don't collect it and store it, right? And if you need to collect it and store it for a short period of time, then do that and then get rid of it. Containers are like the same principle, right?
Yeah. Data minimization as a core principle to not even have to collect the data. But there are many other interesting techniques where you keep your pets at home and never let them leave your area, right, within your bounds. Techniques like federated learning is an example where if I want to run some algorithm across your data set, I can do it without you ever having to give me your data set. And so it allows you to keep your pets at home, never have to go into the wild, but people still be able to get value out of it somehow.
I share pictures of my pets on social media, but I don't need to send them to your house, right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Right.
No, that's really cool stuff.
And as Bob Barker would say, make sure you spade or neuter your pets, which means don't let them propagate more than it needs to.
Right.
You don't. Our data pets are everywhere today.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
They're in all these different companies. They're at Facebook. They're in China. We're asking for trouble.
Sorry, we're running a little short on time. Sounil, we could continue this conversation for far longer. Thank you very much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. For folks that want to learn more, cyberdefensematrix.com. I checked it out. Fascinating stuff. In fact, the matrix looked pretty similar to a slide Adrian had on our previous webcast that we did, and got a lot of praise. Sounil. So keep up the great work. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
I'm a big fan. I use it all the time. Yeah. Which is why I've been mostly silent for this.
Yeah, and just as a quick plug, although I don't like too much self-promotion here, but I am trying to finish a book, and kudos to the people who can
I was going
crank
to
out a
ask
book.
about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I saw that. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I just, yes, I need to finish the book. So
You've been busy, and we'll continue to work on it, and we'll look forward to it.
I look forward to reading it myself.
Outstanding. Sounil, thank you so much. With that, we'll conclude Enterprise Security Weekly for this week. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.